My weekend escape to Miami had been a last-minute decision, a desperate attempt to wrestle back some sanity from the chaos that had become my everyday life. The conference itself was bland, a monotonous drone of corporate jargon and forced networking, but the South Beach sunshine and the occasional mojito had done their part to smooth the frayed edges of my nerves. The original plan was to fly back Monday morning, refreshed and ready to face the week. But fate, or perhaps just the early wrap-up of the presentations, had a different agenda. I snagged a red-eye, picturing a blissful Sunday night of solitude. Take-out Thai, maybe a mindless movie marathon on the couch, and a solid 10 hours of sleep before the Monday morning grind. Pure, unadulterated relaxation. That vision evaporated the moment I pulled into my driveway. The cold, harsh glare of the porch lights assaulted my eyes, instantly alerting me that something was amiss. I distinctly remembered switching them off before leaving. I'm meticulously particular about my routines and keeping everything tidy. A shiver of unease snaked down my spine. Then I heard it, a faint but unmistakable pulsing thump that grew louder as I killed the engine. Music. Not the mellow jazz I preferred, not the hip-hop I occasionally indulged in, but something else. A bizarre symphony of synthesized brass and overly enthusiastic vocals that sounded like it had been ripped straight from a forgotten corner of a 70s discotheque. Earth, Wind and Fire at full blast, followed by some bizarre remix of Stayin', Alive that made my teeth ache. Curiosity and a rapidly escalating sense of dread propelled me towards the front door. I fumbled with my keys, the metallic click of the lock echoing unnervingly in the sudden silence, as the music momentarily paused between tracks. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My jaw dropped. My carefully curated living room had been transformed into a geriatric rave scene. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and something vaguely medicinal, like mothballs and Bengay. About 15 elderly women, a kaleidoscope of floral prints, sensible shoes, and strategically placed hair rollers, were scattered around the room. Some were huddled around a folding table laden with a sad assortment of off-brand cookies and a pitcher of suspiciously pale lemonade. Others were perched precariously on my mid-century modern furniture, their faces illuminated by the glow of bingo cards clutched in trembling hands. The music, blessedly, had stopped again. A cacophony of excited chatter filled the void, numbers being called out, triumphant shouts erupting, and the clatter of bingo markers on cardboard. It was a scene ripped straight out of a bizarre fever dream. I felt a surge of disbelief so profound that I momentarily questioned my own sanity. Had the red-eye flight warped my perception of reality? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? And then I saw her. Standing in the middle of the room, bathed in the flickering light of my oversized television screen, was Karen, my neighbor. The bane of my existence. The woman who had once left a passive-aggressive note on my front door because my lawn wasn't uniformly green enough. The same Karen who had reported me to the HOA for grilling ribs on a Tuesday, a day she had deemed a non-designated BBQ day, according to some obscure rule in the community bylaws. She was holding my Bluetooth speaker in one hand, controlling the sonic assault like a conductor leading a demented orchestra. In the other, she brandished my Apple TV remote, her thumb hovering over the play button, ready to unleash another wave of disco inferno upon my unsuspecting eardrums. A triumphant, almost manic grin stretched across her face. She looked like she was having the time of her life. The sheer audacity of the situation rendered me speechless for a good 30 seconds. I just stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the surreal tableau unfolding before me. The bingo game had resumed, the elderly women oblivious to my presence, completely absorbed in the pursuit of that elusive winning pattern. The thump of my heart threatened to drown out the already deafening music, which had transitioned into some unrecognizable rendition of Dancing Queen. Karen, her back to me, swayed slightly to the beat, her silver hair glinting under the disco ball effect emanating from some light fixture that definitely didn't belong in my house. Finally, the words clawed their way out of my throat. "What in the actual hell is going on here?" I bellowed, my voice cracking slightly from the sheer force of my disbelief and frustration. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every head in the room snapped towards me, a synchronized swivel of wrinkled necks and bewildered expressions. The bingo game ground to a halt. The music abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. 15 pairs of eyes, ranging from vaguely curious to openly hostile, were fixed on me. I felt like I had just interrupted a sacred ritual. Karen slowly turned around, her expression shifting from manic glee to something resembling affronted indignation. She dropped the remote onto my coffee table with a resounding thud and crossed her arms, her posture radiating an air of righteous anger. "You're trespassing," she declared, her voice laced with venom. "You have no right to be here." I blinked, momentarily convinced that I had somehow stumbled into an alternate reality. "Trespassing? In my own house?" I sputtered, gesturing wildly around the room. "Karen, are you out of your mind? This is my house. I live here," she scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Don't play coy with me, Jamal. I know you've been gone. I saw you leave on Friday, and I know you weren't planning on being back until Monday." "That doesn't give you the right to throw a bingo party in my living room," I retorted, my voice rising in volume. "What is wrong with you? Who are these people? And why are they raiding my snack cupboard?" I glanced over at the folding table, where one of the women was surreptitiously stuffing a handful of my favorite protein bars into her purse. Karen puffed out her chest, undeterred. "I thought you weren't coming back," she insisted, her tone dripping with self-righteousness. "And this house was just sitting here, empty. Such a waste. My church group needed a venue for a special event, so I figured, why not put it to good use?" My head was spinning. "You figured? You just figured you could break into my house and throw a bingo party for your church group? Without asking? Without even a phone call?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sheer entitlement of it all was breathtaking. "It's not breaking in if the door's unlocked," she sniffed, avoiding eye contact. "And besides, I was doing you a favor. Keeping the house occupied. Preventing squatters." "Preventing squatters?" I repeated incredulously. "Karen, I have a state-of-the-art security system. I have cameras. I have motion detectors. I don't need your bingo-playing vigilantes protecting my property." "Well, it's too late now," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "We're here. We're having fun. And frankly, you're ruining the atmosphere. So, I suggest you leave. Immediately." I stared at her, speechless. "Leave?" I finally managed to stammer. "You want me to leave my own house? Are you actually serious right now?" "Perfectly serious," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Leave, or I'll call the police." I burst out laughing. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to bear. "You're going to call the police? On me? For being in my own home? Karen, you're delusional." Without a word, she reached into her ridiculously oversized handbag and pulled out her cell phone. The laughter died in my throat. This was actually happening. She was actually going to call the police. My laughter dissolved into a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage as I watched Karen dial 911. "You wouldn't dare," I muttered, but the tremor in my voice betrayed my growing unease. I knew Karen. She was petty, vindictive, and possessed an uncanny talent for escalating even the most minor of disagreements into full-blown neighborhood dramas. But this was a whole new level of crazy. She ignored me, holding the phone to her ear with a smug expression on her face. 911, what's your emergency?" a voice crackled from the speaker. Karen cleared her throat and launched into a performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. "Yes, hello," she said, her voice trembling with faux distress. "I need to report a break-in. A strange man has broken into a friend's home and is threatening a group of elderly women. We're all terrified. He's being very aggressive and just scary." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had conveniently produced from her handbag. I nearly choked. "Strange man? Threatening elderly women?" I sputtered. "Karen, you are unbelievable. I am not threatening anyone. I am simply asking you to leave my property." She glared at me and turned her back, continuing her melodramatic tale to the 911 operator. "He claims he lives here, but we've never seen him before. He's yelling and shouting and making us all very uncomfortable. We're just a group of seniors having a quiet evening of bingo, and he's completely disrupting everything. Please, you have to send someone right away. We're afraid for our safety." I felt a surge of helpless anger wash over me. This was a complete and utter fabrication. A blatant attempt to weaponize the police against me. I wanted to grab the phone from her hand and set the record straight, but I knew that would only make things worse. It would just reinforce her narrative of me being an aggressive, unstable intruder. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. "You're making a huge mistake, Karen," I said, my voice low and controlled. "This is going to backfire on you. I have proof that this is my house. This is going to be a mess for everyone." She just smirked and continued to embellish her story, adding details about how I had allegedly been lurking outside the house for hours before finally forcing my way inside. She even threw in a sob for good measure. After what felt like an eternity, she finally hung up the phone, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "They're on their way," she announced, as if she had just won the lottery. "You won't be laughing for long." I sighed and ran a hand through my hair, trying to formulate a plan. I had to convince the police that I was the victim here, not some crazed intruder. I knew I had my driver's license on me. It showed my current address. I also had the original deed to the house tucked away in my filing cabinet. And of course, there was my security system, which had captured Karen and her bingo brigade breaking into my property. The thought of reviewing that footage brought a small measure of satisfaction. At least I had irrefutable evidence to back up my claims. This whole situation was insane, but I was confident that once the police arrived and saw the facts, they would realize that Karen was the one who was out of line. 15 minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an hour. The elderly women, sensing the shift in atmosphere, had fallen silent, watching me with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of my grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that suddenly seemed incredibly ominous. Finally, I heard the wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached my house. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb, their flashing lights illuminating my front yard in an alternating strobe of red and blue. I straightened my shoulders, preparing to explain my side of the story to the officers who were about to come through that door. The first officer, a young woman with short, cropped hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached the front door cautiously, her hand resting on her holster. Her partner, a larger, older man with a weary expression on his face, followed close behind. The officer took a deep breath and knocked loudly on the frame. "Police, open up," she announced, her voice firm and authoritative. Karen, her eyes wide, with feigned fear, rushed to the door and swung it open, gesturing dramatically towards me. "Officer, thank God you're here," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with manufactured relief. "That man broke into my friend's house. He's been threatening us. Please, you have to arrest him." The officer glanced at me, her expression unreadable. She and her partner cautiously stepped inside, their eyes scanning the scene. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she took in the tableau before her. The overturned bingo table, the scattered cards, the bowl of Werther's Originals sitting precariously on the edge of my coffee table, and the 15 elderly women staring at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. And then there was Karen, dramatically clutching her chest and fake crying to a gospel song that she had somehow managed to cue up on my playlist. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her face contorted in a mask of righteous indignation. "That's him. That's the intruder. He's a danger to us all." The officer turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "Sir, could you please step outside for a moment? We need to ask you some questions." I nodded and calmly walked towards the door, passing Karen without acknowledging her. This was my chance to set the record straight. Outside, the officer led me towards one of the squad cars and began to question me, her voice professional but skeptical. I explained everything, from my weekend trip to Miami to my unexpected return and the shocking discovery I had made upon entering my house. I showed her my driver's license, which clearly displayed my address. I offered to retrieve the deed to my home from my filing cabinet, and I mentioned my security system, which I assured her had captured the entire incident from beginning to end. As I spoke, I could see her partner inside, talking to the elderly women, trying to piece together what had actually happened. I watched as he approached Karen, who was still sobbing and gesturing wildly, and led her away from the group, presumably to get a clearer, more coherent account of the situation. After about 15 minutes of questioning, the officer seemed to be starting to believe my story. She asked me to wait while she consulted with her partner. The two of them huddled together for a few moments, speaking in hushed tones. While they were conferring, I decided to take a quick peek inside my house. I wanted to assess the damage and make sure that nothing had been stolen. I carefully stepped back inside and made my way towards the kitchen. What I found there made my blood boil. Every cabinet had been opened, their contents haphazardly strewn across the countertops, like a tornado had ripped through my meticulously organized pantry. The women had apparently rummaged through everything, searching for snacks and God knows what else. My couch had been moved, inexplicably rotated 90 degrees from its original position. And, to my horror, I discovered that someone had unplugged my refrigerator. The motor was silent, and the interior was starting to warm up. All of my groceries were slowly spoiling. I couldn't believe the level of disrespect and disregard for my property. This wasn't just a harmless bingo party gone wrong. This was a deliberate act of invasion and vandalism. Karen had crossed a line, and I was determined to make her pay for it. Just as I was surveying the damage in the kitchen, the officer returned, her expression more sympathetic than before. "Okay, Mr. Rivers," she said. "I think we're starting to get a better understanding of what happened here." "And?" I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. "Well," she said, "it seems that there are conflicting accounts of what transpired. Ms. Karen maintains that you gave her permission to use your house while you were away on a spiritual sabbatical." I stared at her in disbelief. A spiritual sabbatical? Where did she get that idea? The officer shrugged. "That's what she told the other ladies. One woman even said she thought you had joined a monastery." I couldn't help but laugh. A monastery? Me? I can barely meditate for 5 minutes without getting distracted by my phone. The officer chuckled. "Well, it seems Ms. Neo Karen has been spinning quite the yarn. But, regardless, we're still trying to sort through the details. We need to get a clearer picture of what actually occurred." She paused, then added, "I'm going to have another talk with Ms. Neo Karen. In the meantime, would you mind stepping back outside? We need to keep the area clear while we continue our investigation." I nodded and reluctantly made my way back outside, my mind racing. It was clear that Karen was completely unhinged, and I had no idea what she was capable of. I was worried that she might try to escalate the situation even further. As I waited, on my front lawn, I watched as the officer approached Karen again, her expression stern. The two of them engaged in a heated conversation, their voices rising and falling in intensity. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could tell that Karen was becoming increasingly agitated. Suddenly, Karen's demeanor shifted. Her face contorted in a mask of pure rage, and she began to scream and shout, her voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. She gestured wildly, her arms flailing in the air, and then, without warning, she snapped. She spotted a bingo cage sitting on the edge of my porch and, with a primal scream, grabbed it and hurled it at one of the police cars. The cage slammed against the windshield with a resounding crash, leaving a spiderweb of cracks in the glass. The officer gasped and took a step back, her hand flying to her holster. Karen, her eyes wide with madness, turned and sprinted towards the street, her floral print dress billowing behind her. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen was actually running from the police. Of course, her escape attempt was less than graceful. She was wearing a full windbreaker and a pair of Crocs, hardly the ideal attire for a high-speed chase. She stumbled and flailed, her arms windmilling in the air, and then it happened. She tripped over my garden hose, which I had carelessly left, stretched across the lawn, and went sprawling headfirst into the grass. She landed with a thud, her face buried in the dirt. "I'm being oppressed," she shrieked, her voice muffled by the grass. "This is a violation of my rights. I'm a victim of systemic injustice." The officer quickly caught up to her and placed Karen under arrest for trespassing, filing a false police report, and assaulting an officer's vehicle. She struggled and screamed, but the officer managed to cuff her and haul her to her feet. As they were leading her towards the squad car, Karen continued to rant and rave, accusing me of being a communist, a socialist, and a member of the Illuminati. The scene was utterly surreal. The bingo table was overturned, the cards scattered across the lawn. My garden hose lay coiled and abandoned, a silent witness to the chaos. And Karen, my neighbor from hell, was being hauled away in handcuffs, screaming about oppression and injustice. But the crazy didn't end there. As the officers were loading Karen into the back of the patrol car, one of the older ladies, a woman with bright pink hair and an even brighter floral dress, decided to take matters into her own hands. "Free Karen!" she yelled, her voice surprisingly strong for someone her age. She grabbed a muffin from the overturned snack table and hurled it at the officer who was standing guard by the car. The muffin, a blueberry monstrosity that looked like it had been baked sometime in the early 1980s, hit the officer square in the back of the head. He winced and turned around, his face a mask of disbelief. "Did you just throw a muffin at me?" he asked, his voice incredulous. The woman nodded defiantly. "Yes, I did. And I'd do it again. You can't arrest Karen. She's a saint." The officer sighed and shook his head. "Ma'am, you're going to have to calm down. Assaulting a police officer is a serious crime." "I don't care!" the woman yelled. "Karen was just trying to help us. She's the only one who cares about us old people." Before the officer could respond, another woman, a tiny, frail-looking woman with a walker, chimed in. "Yeah, free Karen. She's a good person." The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. The officers were clearly overwhelmed. They had gone from responding to a simple break-in call to dealing with a full-blown geriatric riot. "Okay, that's enough," the officer yelled, his voice strained. "Everyone just calm down. We're not going to arrest anyone else." But it was too late. The woman who had thrown the muffin lunged at the officer, attempting to claw at his face. He quickly restrained her, but she continued to thrash and kick. "Let me go," she screamed. "I'll bite you. I'll bite your nose off." The officer sighed again and called for backup. Within minutes, another squad car arrived, its sirens wailing. The officers managed to subdue the two elderly women and load them into the back of the patrol car, along with Karen. As they drove off, leaving a trail of scattered bingo cards, overturned furniture, and broken dreams in their wake, I couldn't help but feel a sense of utter bewilderment. What had started as a simple weekend getaway had somehow devolved into a scene straight out of a deranged comedy. My dog, Buster, finally emerged from his hiding place in the bathroom, his tail tucked between his legs, his eyes wide with fear. He padded cautiously towards me, sniffing at the wreckage. "It's okay, Buster," I said, patting him on the head. "It's all over now." The officers apologized profusely as they drove off, leaving me standing on my front lawn, surrounded by the debris of the bingo-fueled chaos. The stench of lavender and mothballs hung heavy in the air. I looked around at the scene of devastation, and a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning of my troubles with Karen. But for now, all I wanted to do was clean up this mess, order some takeout, and try to forget that any of this had ever happened. I decided on pizza and vowed to invest in an industrial-strength vacuum cleaner first thing in the morning. I was going to need it.